This thing we talk about with the server and the client is called the network boundary. So this is like the distinguished line between server and client.
So basically what the RSC payload is, it's like a compact binary representation of the RSC components tree. And we have basically three things the RSC contains. The first of them would be the rendered result of server components, the server rendering strategies. We have three of them. I remember when I first saw the Next 13 release, I was like, man, there's another thing I have to take care of in the code base. If you want the interactivity, just go for the client component.
Yes, as a rule of thumb.
Yeah, exactly. Hello everybody, welcome to the NextGen Web Podcast. In today's episode, we are going to talk about Next.js Rendering Strategies. Basically, in today's era where single-page applications with fully client-side rendering are shifting more towards hybrid approach with both server-side and client-side rendering, we think it's vital to have a good understanding of these techniques in order to build production-grade Next.js applications. If you guys like this episode, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Thank you and enjoy watching the show. So I guess we can start with the basics, Philip. So maybe we can briefly talk about just the rendering overview. So maybe just the environments we have for the rendering of our routes and components.
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, we have two environments our code can live in. These are the server and the client side of our application. The whole web development is kind of making a cycle shift in this paradigm, because in earlier we had this server approach with, for example, PHP, Ajax, fetching, and so on. And then we went into single-page applications, which were client-side mainly. And right now we have like a hybrid approach where some of the code is in our client side and some of it is on the server. So let's distinguish these two environments. First of all, let's talk about maybe client side. This is all the code that lives in browser of our user's machine. So everything that is loaded into user's machine and used there is the client side, and everything that lives on our application server is the server side. And the main advantage of using this hybrid approach is that we can separate our concerns. For example, if we have some interactive things like animations, we have some React hooks, stuff like that. We can move them closer to the client side because we have to. And with things like fetching data, with managing some user state, we can leave it to the server. And this will increase the performance of our application and overall simplify the architecture. So this will be the big two environments we can write our code in. And all of this comes to the request response lifecycle, which is recurring over and over again while we use the website. So once the user goes into our website and clicks something, for example, submits a form, or does any other interaction with our website, his request is being sent into our server, and then depending on what the action was, our server is processing it and returning a response to the user. So this can be part of code, some asset, JS, HTML, depends on the request user has made. And this response is being downloaded on the user's site and served to him as user interface. So basically, this is the, let's say, whole cycle of our application. And this thing we talk about with the server and the client is called the network boundary. So this is like the distinguished line between server and client. And right now with Next.js, we can manage this independently with our directives, like use client, for example. By default, we have server components. We can also use directives like server only, but we will talk about that later. And yeah, I think that will be like the high-level overview of how our code operates in server and client modes, and we can dive more into the server components.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. That was a very deep dive into the basics. Thank you for that. So basically, maybe just one disclaimer for the people watching today. As we have some kind of more broad topic today, you can catch us look into the notes more frequently than usual. But as it's a very important topic, we just don't want to like miss anything. So yeah, just a quick disclaimer. So basically, we've talked about the basics. And as you said, we can dive into the server components. Basically, server components, the new hot thing in web development. I think we can start off by just providing the benefits of the server components. So the first big pro of the server components, I would say, is the performance it gives. So thanks to the fact that we can basically take advantage of maybe just the old school approach of rendering the HTML on the server, we can ship less JavaScript to the browser. And as everybody knows, the less JS in the browser, the better. Especially if we have trends where most of the traffic is being moved, for example, to the mobile devices. The less JS we ship to the browser, the better user experience we can provide for the users. So that is like the first pro that comes to my mind. What comes with that is also metrics like initial page load and metrics like FCP, the first contentful paint. So basically, we can just provide content faster with rendering it on the server side. And also, the next big thing regarding the SEO would be just optimization for the crawlers. So as we are rendering the content on the server side, the crawlers get to just go through the HTML and can basically index our sites faster and better. What else? The caching, which is the next big thing. So basically, in the current Next version, all of the server-side components are being cached by default. It is going to change in the Next 15. I remember we did an episode with the updates coming in Next 15, but as for now, every server-side component is being cached by default, which is also great. We can just take advantage of the faster load times with the caching. I don't know, Philip, what else do we have as the pro for the server components?
I think this two you mentioned, performance and SEO optimization, will be the biggest one for our users, both for the developer experience and for user experience, because right now many of website owners and business owners care about how good their SEO is. They hire SEO experts and stuff like that, but we need to remember that it all starts with the basics. So it starts with good practices when it comes to creating our website, and using Next.js is like probably one of the best ways to ensure that our SEO will be on spot from start on. And yeah, I think we can also talk a little bit about streaming and data fetching. Let's start maybe with streaming. So our components can be separated into chunks. so we don't have to wait for the whole UI to be rendered at the same time. We can serve it in portions for users. Of course, this also is related to data fetching. So we can move our data fetching operations closer to the server, which increases the performance, and as I mentioned before, simplifies the architecture and maintainability of the whole application. And with the support of third-party libraries, we can also ensure that we don't have this popcorn UI thing when our components get rendered one after the other in really random way. With
yes,
React
the classic spinner hell in the
Yes.
SPA applications. Yeah, that's true.
So with help of React Suspense and things like that, we can avoid that issue. And I think this will be the biggest and most interesting advantages of server components, I think. Do you see any cons of that, maybe?
Yeah, well, for sure, the server components has like some constraints for sure. We are also going to talk about it later, but we have to keep in mind that as we are leveraging the server for rendering the HTML, we are kind of sacrificing the interactivity in those components. Also, we have to keep in mind in terms of Next that if we tend to use the server side, it doesn't mean we are opting out of the client-side interactivity. So basically, we can choose the hybrid approach and use the server-side components for the static elements of the page, and also embed the client components directly there, just to assure we have both the server-side performance and the client-side interactivity. So basically, web apps these days are tend to be very interactive. So that's very important to just be able to ship both performance server components and interactive client components. So yeah, I think we've covered the main pros of the server components. So we can dive into the way the server components are being rendered.
Yeah.
So here comes the term that is the RSC Payload, which obviously comes for the React Server Component Payload. I'm pretty sure some of Next.js devs that use Next.js are not very familiar with the term, so I guess we can just briefly talk about what the RSC payload really is, because it's a very important thing in terms of rendering the server components.
Yeah, sure. So when we are creating a server-side component and then want to serve it to our user, we just give the React Server Components payload and our client components instructions to React, actually. So it can be served as HTML for a user. So this payload is a special data format in which we can say to the server, hey, this is the HTML we want to see, and then this HTML is being served to the user without any interactivity. That's important. We just have the static HTML file, and after that we get the hydration and everything becomes interactive with the JavaScript that we are our users are downloading from the responses. And the big advantage of this is that our HTML static site is being served almost at once when we are reaching the website. So it really makes the first look and user experience better than if we would have to wait until whole chunk of JavaScript is downloaded and parsed and then converted into HTML.
Yeah, sure. We can also maybe come back to the RSC payload itself, because I would say it's a bit more complex term. So basically what the RSC payload is, it's like a compact binary representation of the RSC components tree. And we have basically three things the RSC contains. The first of them would be the rendered result of server components. The second thing is the placeholder for where the client's components are supposed to be rendered. I believe you mentioned that before. And also the third one would be the props we are passing from a server component to the client component. So that just by leveraging the RSC payload architecture, we are getting, the best of the two worlds of the client side and the server side components rendering. So basically, I think it's worth just knowing what the RSC payload really is, especially because it works kind of behind the scenes in the server-side rendering. But it's good to know how the React server component rendering really works. So I guess we can move on to the next topic, which would be the server rendering strategies. We have three of them.
Yes.
So we can start off with the good old static rendering.
Yes, I think this is the default behavior how our pages are being served.
For now, yeah.
For now, yes. So right now, if we don't have any dynamic functions in our code, and everything we do is being cached, and we don't use any specific functions for dynamic pages, like for example headers or cookies, then our page is being built, being created at build time and being served for the user when he visits our website. The main difference between the static and dynamic pages is that our page is being created at build time and not at request time. So this increases the speed of delivery and performance of this page, because the user doesn't have to wait for the page to be created, but it's rather being served right away.
Sure. So just so that we don't forget the dynamic functions, you mentioned the cookies and the headers. Also, we have one more thing here, which are the search params.
Yes,
so basically, when we navigate to the route that leverages the search params, obviously we are using the information that are being served at the runtime. So we have to opt into the dynamic routing. But also coming back to the static rendering, I would say we can mention also that after we are building our rendering our pages on the build time, they can also be served via CDN, for example, which also improves the performance. But also with the static rendering, we are not only have the availability to render the pages on build time, but also we have tools like ISR, which is basically like revalidation, for example, based on a webhook. So you can imagine based on a use case where the typical scenario for a static page, the first things that comes into my mind is obviously like a blog page, which after it's being published, there's probably it's not going to be updated very frequently. But with the static rendering, we can also, for example, plug in a webhook that after the page is updated, you can send the request to re-render the page with ISR, and we can just assure we don't have a stale content. So that's very good for pages that are not changing very frequently. So as we said, for example, the blog page, or in e-commerce sites like a product page, which doesn't change very frequently. So that would be it for the static rendering. We can move to the dynamic rendering, which is quite a bit more complex. So I guess we're gonna stay in this topic for a bit. So, as we said, we have the dynamic functions, which basically opt us into the dynamic rendering. But also, I would say the biggest thing here in the dynamic rendering in the Next.js is the caching. So basically, as for now, as we mentioned before, the caching is by default, but we have quite a lot of control over the caching. And also regarding the cache, we have different types of cache. So maybe we can just talk about what types of caches do we have in the dynamic rendered sites.
Sure. So first of all, I would like to avoid getting really deep into caching stuff.
That's a good catch, actually.
Because this can be a material for the whole new episode.
Sure,
so
it's very complex.
We can talk for another hour about caching only. The thing we need to know for now is currently in the current version of Next, we have it enabled by default, which sparkles a little bit of controversy among developers. But overall, as you mentioned, we have a lot of control between how we want to cache things. We also have the revalidation that is possible to handle it by time, for example, or by specific action with revalidation on demand. So this is a broad topic. I don't know if we want to get really into this right now. But one thing I would like to go back into the differences between static and dynamic pages is that we need to remember that not only the appearance of dynamic functions dedicates if the page is being dynamic or static, but also if our data is being cached, because if we don't have any dynamic functions, but we have the cache disabled for it, it will be also a dynamic page. So this is something we need to remember. And yeah, maybe you can take us a little bit more into this dynamic pages topic.
Yeah, sure. So basically, that's a good comment not to dive very deep into the caching, because we could spend another 3 hours talking about just the cache or more. Yeah, specifically in the terms of the Next apps. But I guess we can just mention like maybe a few mechanisms of caching, and we can leave the deep dive into the caching for another episode. We have like full route cache, we have the data cache. Also client side, we would have the router cache. So for example, if we navigate through the pages, we are not having the loading indicator after we visit the page once. And also we have the request memoization. So basically these are the main techniques to cache our dynamic pages. But also here, as we use the proper caching for the dynamic pages, it doesn't mean we are sacrificing the performance here. So just by providing the proper cache keys and just wisely using overall the caching for the dynamic pages, we are still leveraging the speed of Next.js. So if we have the pages that are changing more frequently, and we are using the dynamic rendering, it doesn't really mean we are going to just introduce bigger latency to our app. We are just using kind of different set of tools here.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, we also mentioned streaming here. So maybe Philip, you can just say a few words about what the streaming really is, because I would say it's also kind of a hot topic, and as I remember, it's being kind of built in by default to the Next, and it allows the best possible user performance.
Yes, so with the help of React Suspense, we can introduce streaming into our applications. It is being supported by default by Next right now. And the whole idea of it is that we can see the part of our application, of our UI, before something else is being finished. For example, not the whole UI is being rendered at the same time, but we need to serve user something just to showcase him that the page is working and it's being loaded and it's not, it has not frozen. So that's why we have this streaming for progressively showing our UI. Mostly, I think the most broad use case right now is with React Suspense. We just wrap part of UI we want to have. For example, we expect something to maybe take a little bit longer than other components, and we wrap it in React Suspense. And then if this thing happens to render a little bit longer, then we don't have a freeze, but rather we can show some spinner, as you mentioned, or some other loading state we would like to see.
Yeah, it's great that you mentioned the suspense. So basically, Next also have the built-in system for providing the loading states for specific subsets of the routes.
Yes.
I'm talking about the loading page, which basically uses suspense under the hood. But it's a very convenient way to basically wrap the routes in the loading state. And for example, just the classic architecture where we have just the layout, maybe with some navbar, and we have the page inside of this layout which fetches the data. So basically, if we wrap this route with the loading file, when we enter the page, we are going to see the navbar immediately, and we're gonna see the loading indicator in the place where the route is being rendered. So it's very convenient to use in the production apps with just the file routing system. And yeah, that's a very cool mechanism just to provide feedback to the user that something is loading, basically. Yeah, so I guess that would be it for streaming. We can move to the client components.
Yes, the one thing I would like to start with, a little bit coming back to the server components topic, is that we have our server components by default. If we not use client directive, we have a server component. Sorry. I know that it also has sparkled some discussion between developers about like another thing to remember.
Yeah. Sure.
But I think overall it's pretty intuitive, because if we try to use some client-side code in server components, then we get an error, and React is and Next is telling us, hey, you probably would like to use client directive for that. For example, with React hooks. And one thing we need to remember is that after we create a client component with use client directive, we need to remember that all of its children also become client components.
Yeah, that's very important, and many people fall into the pitfall that they use the use client directive and they forget that all of the children, sorry, not the children, but the components that are going to be rendered there, basically inherit the use client.
Yeah. Yes, I saw some examples with pages where the top level component of a page was a client component, and all of its children also became client components, which is like counterproductive when it comes to whole performance benefits server components are trying to give us. So please remember to always think if this component really needs to be client-side, because we don't have like that much necessity to use them so often. Probably just with some hooks or some client-specific operations. But overall, reminder, just think about this if we really want to use client component in that scenario.
As we are in this topic, I would say we can also mention that there is a possibility to actually pass the server components into the client components as children. But we are also going to talk about the kind of the composition patterns later. But it is possible to leverage it in this way. And also coming back to the thing you said with the directives, the use client, for example. I remember when I first saw the Next 13 release, I was like, man, there's another thing I have to take care of in the code base. And you just kind of have to shift your mindset. But to be honest, at the end of the day, I would say that's very good. And I think that the caching is kind of moving into the same way. So basically what I mean is that we have to explicitly tell that this is supposed to be the client component. And thanks to that, we are more aware where we are using the client component and if we should really mark it as a client component. And same goes to caching. If we like explicitly, just set the cache, we are more aware of that. So that would be just the take on the client side use client directives. And also in the client components, obviously, if we want to use the specific browser APIs, yes. For example, I don't know, just the local storage or the geolocation, obviously we won't have this type of information on the server side. So in these type of components, we have to use the use client directive. And also all of the hooks in React, for example, the use memo, use callback, the good old use effect. Obviously, if we want to use these type of hooks, we have to use it in client components as well.
And also a whole bunch of listeners.
Yep.
So almost everything that needs like an immediate feedback to the user and updating UI immediately, it's only for client-side components. So if we want to use some web browser APIs, like you mentioned geolocation or local storage, or we need to have some interactive component, then we use client-side, and all except that we use server side.
Yeah, so basically, if you want the interactivity, just go for the client component.
Yes, as a rule of thumb.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I would say that would be it for the client components. We can move to the composition patterns. It is very interesting topic as well, and we are also going to just look at some code examples. So the first topic that comes here, I would say, is the data sharing between the components. So basically before, we would take advantage of tools like React Context, some kind of global store. Here in the server components approach, we can also leverage the built-in caching, for example, in the fetch. So basically, we can just put the function call in many places. But as we did the request once and it is cached, then we don't sacrifice the latency here. So that is also a pretty big shift, just in sharing the data, where we are basically, just leveraging the caching here.
Yeah, so that looks really promising because, as you mentioned earlier, we had to use some or React context, which is not ideal, at least for me. I don't like the whole boilerplate thing with providers and consumers of this, and it would be also not ideal to use a third-party library because we need to add another bunch of external code into our application and add another bunch of JavaScript that is coming with it. And with this next behavior, we can just put a bunch of same requests, and if one is being cached, then we just reuse it. It
exactly.
Nice.
Simple as that. Sure. So we can move to the next example, which would be keeping the server-only code out of the client environment. And we also have a quick code example, which is basically straight from the Next.js docs. So as you can see here, we are using the server-only directive. So what it does, it ensures we are using this code where it should belong, which in this case would be server-side. You can also see that we are using the process env API key, which is not marked as next public. So basically what it means, it is not exposed to the browser. So we can be pretty sure it's some sensitive API key, and we want to keep it server-side. So thanks to this directive, if we would try to use this function client-side, we would actually get Next.js build error. So just by providing this type of annotation, we are ensuring we are not shipping the broken code to production. The next thing is the third-party packages and providers. I don't know, Philip, can you just like maybe briefly talk about the code we have here?
Sure. So as you can see here, we have the use client directive because we use, for example, use state hook. So we have to use the client side component, and we are using the carousel from some external library. So as you can see here, with that we can with that client component we can safely use our external library with the client component. But if we would try to use it on the server side, we would have the usage error. But we can overcome this issue, as you mentioned earlier when we were talking about client components specifically, that with this the declarative use client, we can also use this kind of export pattern when we are exporting this server-side component as a client-side component and use it safely. So this is something we can use to bypass.
Sure. Yeah.
I think a common issue and common error with I at least had some experience when I was like at first mixing up these concerns, trying to use the server-side code with client components and reverse. So at first it was kind of messy for me. Maybe for some people still is. So I think this is a nice solution.
Yeah, that's very helpful, and especially I think most of the packages providers tend to just use the directive in order to also just be adaptable to Next.js apps. But in case you want to use the component that doesn't have the directive, just the simple trick with the exporting as use client just does the job pretty much.
That's true. So the next one, we have the moving clients components down the tree.
Yeah.
And this is something I was talking about before.
Exactly, yeah.
So maybe just to wrap this thing up, if we are trying to imagine, for example, a blog page where we have a one small animation or something that needs user interactivity, let's just put this client component in a, let's say, isolated box and move it as low in
as deep in the tree as possible.
Yes,
yeah,
yes. So
exactly.
So we can leverage this server-side optimization as much as possible.
Yeah, sure. So like the quick example that comes to my mind, basically just navbar, where you have a search bar, for example. So instead of marking the whole navbar as a client component, where basically you don't have to have the interactivity on the whole component, you can just separate the search bar into a separate component and import it to the server-side navbar. So that would be like the basic example for this. And here comes the two patterns we've mentioned before a little bit, which is importing the server components into the client components, which basically cannot be done. But instead, we can pass server components to client components as props. So these are the two important patterns. I don't know, Philip, you would like to add something to it? I believe it's pretty straightforward. And also, we would get the next build errors if we try to do it. But yeah, basically, these are the main patterns here.
Yeah, I think this is pretty self-explanatory. We cannot import server-side stuff into client components, and this is, I think, really intuitive. But we can pass it as props because a component doesn't know what kind of props it will have. Like for example, with children, we cannot just it can't foresee it. So yeah, I think there is not much to add to it.
Yeah, sure. Cool. So basically, as a summary of the patterns here, I guess we can just look at the table the Next.js provides as just the quick summary. So basically, if we want to fetch the data, basically we want to tend to the server side. Also, while fetching the data on the server components, we are usually closer to the source, to the data resources. So it can also just improve the performance and reduce the latency here. Same comes to the accessing the backend resources. Also, we've mentioned before keeping the access tokens or the API keys, as we've shown before on the example. Obviously, these are stuff we want to keep server side. And also just the large dependencies, just to ensure we are not shipping the JS to the browser. And as we mentioned before, basically you can see here all of the use states, the lifecycle effects, also any type of interactivity in the components, also the browser-only APIs, which we mentioned before. Or we can also see here we have the React class components, which are basically kind of forgotten right now. But if you would like to use the class components, obviously you would have to do it in the client component. So that is the brief summary of these patterns. Where should we pick what strategy to render our components? And I think we can safely move to the last topic for today, which are the Edge and the Node.js runtimes.
Yes, so we have different runtimes we can use when we are building our next application. So we have Edge developed by Vercel, and we have the plain old Node.js, which comes in two versions, but we'll talk about it later. So maybe let's start with Edge. And I think this was a really exciting and hot topic a few years back, a few next versions back, when this was introduced. The whole Edge naming, it really sparked the idea that it will be like blazing fast, and it will be a game changer, we can say, in using runtimes. But I think the issue with it, I have at least, it's like it doesn't support all of these Node.js APIs, which means we can use a fraction of npm packages, and not all of them may work. So, for example, we cannot use like FS module and stuff like that. So I believe right now, for me at least, the go-to solution would be to using Node.js, and I think you can tell a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. Maybe just a quick note on the Edge runtime. Also, we have to keep in mind that it's supposed to do the lighter task, kind of, you can say. Also, for example, in Vercel, if we want to use the Edge functions, the code that is executed there basically cannot exceed between 1 and 4 megabytes. Which includes the packages, the fonts, files, and will basically vary on our deployment infrastructure. But yeah, also, as you mentioned, the Node.js runtime, which is the default one, Obviously, we don't have so many limitations. It comes with a bit bigger latency, but it's not like a big pain point. So it's basically the default runtime with the Next.js routes. Also, we have the serverless here, where we can leverage basically the whole the Node.js ecosystem. So we are not using only the subset of the npm packages, for example, as in the case of the Edge functions. Basically, we have access to pretty much everything Node.js has to offer here.
Yes, I think the serverless is like a bridge between Edge and Node.js runtime, I would say.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I guess we can bring up the short code snippet here. So if we want to specifically tell if the root or the layout should render on the Edge or the Node.js, we simply export const runtime, which is the Edge or the Node.js by default.
Yep, pretty straightforward.
Pretty straightforward, exactly. Yeah, so basically we are coming to the end of today's episode. So we've covered a broad amount of topics here, starting off with the basics of the rendering, the server components, with the brief caching overview. Later on, the client-side rendering, the patterns which we should use, and the composition, and ending with the Edge and the Node.js runtime. I don't know, Philip, would like to add something for today's episode?
I think we've covered all of the most general topics regarding the rendering strategies and some about caching. I think it can also lead to some more episodes about this, as we can go a little bit deeper. We also had a touch about architecture and how to compose our components. But yeah, I think that will be all for today's episode.
Yeah, sure. So if you like the content, just make sure to like, subscribe, and leave the feedback in the comments. Also, let us know if you like the more deep dive tech talks, where we specifically focus on some tech details. Just let us know in the comments. And as always, thank you for watching.